Hey guys, it's Pineapple, and with the epic match between Class 1A and 1B going on this season, I actually wanted to take a deeper look at the teams and explore their stats from My Hero Academia's official databook, My Hero Academia Ultra Analysis. If you don't know, the Ultra Analysis databook was a guidebook released in Japan that Horikoshi himself worked on and filled with all sorts of information and, more importantly, the official stats for just about every character in the series. The book is only available in Japan for now, although it has been announced for an official release eventually. If you're into this kind of content and want me to try more often, let me know by getting this video to 1,000 likes. And of course, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button and turned on those notifications so you never missed out on a new upload. With all that said, let's get to breaking down exactly what the guidebook has to say about our two teams after that intro. Hit it! These videos are meant to serve as a good stat reference guide for the characters fighting in each episode, but I hope that they also serve as a useful way to help people keep track of the names and quirks of these students, as well as their stats and maybe even a little trivia if I can dig some up. The hope is this makes it easier for people who complain about not being able to remember the Class 1A or 1B students, so they can finally have something that you can link them when their memories start to get a little foggy. I also want to say thank you to a few sources that you can find in my description for their translations on the Ultra Analysis databook, and that of course includes Audrey on Twitter and Shimi Konda and Origami on Tumblr respectively. The community appreciates your hard work and the fact that we're only able to discuss these stats because of people like you, so thank you. First off, we're going to start off with Class 1B's team, and the big man himself is up first. Gevaudan, otherwise known as Shishida Juurouta, is the sometimes tame, sometimes wild beast of Class 1B, and in this episode he definitely got a lot of shine, as he quickly proved that Class 1B has some pretty powerful quirks with his ferocious assault of Class 1A. His quirk, Beast, lets him change his size and grow into a big hulking version of himself, with the change in size and musculature enhancing his speed and strength, adding to his defense by puffing up and thickening the strong mane that surrounds his body, and finally giving him a sort of feral sense that combines scent and sounds to help Shishida keep an extremely accurate picture of where a person is. Getting to his stats, Shishida has an A in power, B in speed, C in technique, C in intelligence, and an A in his way with words. Remember, of course, that the last stat for every character is supposed to be more of a personality stat that isn't meant to be taken as seriously. Now, Shishida's hero name is probably a reference to the Beast of Gevaudan, the name attributed to a real-life story of a strange beast that terrorized an area of southern France, ultimately killing more than 100 people in the area. There's been some argument over history regarding whether or not the beasts were just wolves. However, whereas usually it would just take a single shot to down a wolf, these beasts survived dozens of shots over the years of their activity. And that makes me think that Shishida's incredibly strong defense in his beast mode is likely attributed to this part of the story, if this truly was the inspiration for his character after all. One more thing I found about Shishida which is really fitting is this. Apparently he admires teacher Hound Dog, who we saw last season during the Gentle Criminal arc, and he wishes to be able to throw away all reason like him, but he was brought up by a very well-mannered and doting family, which prevents him from doing so. Meaning that in actuality, Shishida wants to be way more like a beast, but his well-mannered nature is keeping him from wilding out. Moving on to the next character in Team 1B, we have the hero formerly known as Maria, and now known as Vine. I'm talking of course about Shiozaki Ibara with her long and thorny hair, and in this episode she definitely served as a massive thorn in Class 1A's side with her ability to do recon and lock people down with her powerful quirk, of course keeping with the theme of Class 1B having some really actually impressive abilities on their side. Her quirk, Vines, lets her completely control the movements and length of the thorny vine-like hair that grows on her head. And the power that these strands are packing isn't something to scoff at, because they can easily pierce through concrete and they're multiple enough to cover massive and intricate areas, making her quirk a very handy one for dungeon exploration, search and rescue, or taking on and restraining large groups of enemies. Her stats are a C in power, B in speed, D in intelligence, A in technique, and an A in holiness, which brings us to some information and trivia about her personality. As you've probably noticed, everything about Shiozaki has some root in religion, with just about all of her attack names being some sort of religious or biblical reference, and even her birthday and old hero name matching those of the Virgin Mary. Kaminari is pretty terrified of her due to the way that her quirk has been able to lock him down, and that was definitely something that he tried to overcome in this episode by using a support gear to aim his electricity behind Shiozaki's grounding vines. Ultimately, it took Class 1A a lot of teamwork to get Shiozaki in the joint training prison, and she's definitely one of the scarier characters in Class 1B, which in my opinion opinion conflicts nicely with her sort of religious healer vibe. Finally, on Shiozaki in Ultra Analysis, Horikoshi went out of his way to tell us that drawing her hair is incredibly difficult, so each time in order to do so, he has to make sure to really mentally prepare himself. Next up, we've got the air shield hero Tsuburaba, also known by his full name, Kosei Tsuburaba. You should recognize this member of Class 1B from the sports festival since he was part of Monoma's team, which took on Bakugo's team during the headband stealing portion of the exams. His quirk, Solid Air, allows him to breathe air that can form into various shapes, and the air itself is actually quite durable, allowing Tsuburaba to create shields or even domes and prisons made out of air. These again can be really difficult to shatter without some sort of weapon or enhancement quirk, and with the speed at which these air creations can be formed, Tsuburaba can be a really welcome source of support for his team. We saw this in this week's episode, where Tsuburaba uses air prison on Shinso and Koda to keep them locked down, but the quirk could also be used in the same way on himself or his allies to put them in a box that would keep them safe from danger as well. His stats are as follows. He has a D in power, C in speed, B in intelligence, A+ in technique, and an A+ in providing protection. On top of his stats, Ultra Analysis also adds that Tsuburaba has greatly respected Todoroki ever since the forest training camp, and in his free time, he entertains Kaibara and Kurohito with tales of romance. And on top of that, he's actually Kaibara's best friend. Finally, rounding out Class 1B's first team, we have the hero Dragon Shroud, also known by his full name, Hiryu Rin. Hiryu has one of my favorite designs in Class 1B, since his design is based off of a jiangshi, which are undead vampire and zombie-like creatures from Chinese folklore. The East Asian influence of his character and his quirk comes together in a really unique way, I feel, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Hiryu's quirk, Scales, lets Hiryu form a layer of strong draconic scales on his body. These scales offer Hiryu a good level of defense, but they also do a good deal of damage in a close-up fight. In this episode, however, we saw another great application of his quirk, which allowed Hiryu to step into the role of a long-range fighter. Thanks to gauntlets on each arm, Hiryu was able to shoot out these scales in a really accurate and narrow spread, which effectively gives him long-range bullets that he can use to tear enemies apart from a distance while he steps in and closes the gap and gets in for some close quarters punishment. Hiryu's stats are as follows. He has a C in power, C in speed, A in intelligence, B in technique, and an A in Chineseness. That final stat again is definitely a reference to all the aspects of Hiryu's design that come from Chinese and East Asian lore and mythology, with his quirk being heavily inspired by Chinese dragons, which are seen as forces of wisdom. This of course matches the perception that Class 1B has of Hiryu, which is that of a firm character that they can rely on. A few fun facts about him are that he's one of the few students at UA that we know is actually a foreigner, after moving to Japan from China when he was very young. Another thing to take note of is to keep up the creation of those powerful scales, much like how Momo has to eat to give her quirk lipids to burn for her creations, Hiryu has to take keratin and calcium supplements, or at least eat foods high in both, to keep his quirk working efficiently. From here on out, we move on to Class 1A's team and their stats. The first member of Class 1A is going to be Chargevolt, or Chargezuma, otherwise known as the electrifying member of the class, Denki Kaminari. Lightning powers tend to be a favorite of mine in any cast of characters, and Kaminari has definitely been working over the course of the series to become more and more of a fan favorite, developing his quirk that was wild and hard to control in the beginning to something that can be much more precise and useful in a team situation. His quirk, Electrification, allows Kaminari to take in and release electric energy in various ways. He can do something like keep a car battery running by holding the wires, charge his body with enough electricity to viciously stun anyone who touches him, or he can use that same charged up energy to either send out a wave of electricity that can stun and damage opponents, and he also has the option to use his support items to send the electricity along certain paths towards specific points, allowing him to pretty much shoot electricity and create traps for his foes. It's a very versatile ability, and as long as he keeps himself from using too much energy and going into his brain fried mode, Denki is a really competent hero on the battlefield, which we'll see more of in future arcs. Kaminari's stats are as follows. He has a B+ in power, C in speed, E in intelligence, B in technique, and an S in wee, which I guess is the noise that he makes in his brain fried mode. The Ultra Analysis guide describes him as a flashy playboy who tends to be the life of the party, and also notes that he has what's potentially one of the strongest quirks in the class. Funny enough, a fun fact is that it also notes that most electric quirk users actually take on high salary positions because of how useful their quirks are. So that means if the day ever comes where there's peace and Kaminari wants to retire from the life of a hero, he'll probably retire to a high paying job and a comfortable life. Next up, we have the brave, red, hot-spirited hero who doesn't let anyone behind him bleed, Red Riot, otherwise known as Kirishima Eijiro. We saw a lot of Kirishima last season, season thanks to his first use of Unbreakable and his battle against Rappa alongside Fat Gum. In this episode, we saw Kirishima at least try and go up against Shishida, but he kept getting flung around by the beast in his enlarged form, so he was out of the match pretty early on. Kirishima's quirk hardening of course allows him to harden the skin into jagged and rough forms that can keep him safe from damage at times, and also help him serve out damage when he starts to go on the offense. And of course, nothing better exemplifies that ability more than Kirishima's Unbreakable form, which involves Kirishima pushing his hardening to the max, making him a moving weapon with extremely hard to break armor. Kirishima's stats come in as an A in power, C- in speed, C in intelligence, D in technique, and an S in manly spirit. Everything about Kirishima revolves around being super strong and manly, and part of that is his admiration for the hero Crimson Riot, which Kirishima more or less named his hero name after. Of course, like we found out last season, he dyed his hair after getting accepted into UA, and Ultra Analysis tells us that he has to use a special shampoo mixed with red hair dye to maintain the consistent coloring of the dye even as his hair grows, keeping the roots from being exposed. Member 3 of Class 1A's first team is the frog hero Froppy, otherwise known as Tsuyu Asui, who honestly has been putting in work ever since the first season. In this episode, Tsuyu's role was to remove Tsuburaba from the picture by snatching him away the moment that Shishida was stunned. But she also came up with a great plan at the end of the match to trick Shishida's senses using the mucus that her body creates, while also taking advantage of her invisibility and agile movements. All of this is thanks to her quirk, Frog, which gives her a number of frog-like abilities, the most noticeable namely being her tongue, which can be extended and shot out to help her get from point A to point B, or used to capture and restrain certain opponents as she uses the tongue as a sort of hook shot. Froppy's stats are pretty much what you'd expect for her well-rounded kit. She has a C in power, B+ in speed, A in intelligence, A in technique, and an S in dependability. The Ultra Analysis guide describes her as an honor student with excellent mental fortitude, which lets her really think through and analyze situations and people with a shockingly high level of insight. That match with the description of her having a good poker face and not being scared easily comes together to paint the picture of a very wise and aware person. Now, I've played around with the idea of Froppy being the UA traitor only because I thought it would make that early scene of her crying and being supported by the class hit way harder in reflection, but now with her S in dependability, her ability to go invisible, and all this about her having a good poker face and great insight, I feel like it honestly paints the picture of someone who'd be a really good fit as a spy or a traitor, despite the fact that apparently the 1A students have already been cleared of suspicion. So depending on how much you believe in the idea that the Class 1A students are cleared for suspicion, that's something. The second to last member of this team is the Animal Communication Specialist, Anima, otherwise known as Koji Koda. Koda found himself trapped inside of one of Tsuburaba's prisons this episode, but once he was broken free, he actually showed a rare sign of bravery side by side of Kirishima as he righted himself to take on the massive Shishida who was trying to capture Froppy. Koda is actually a pretty big guy, but again he's usually very timid in nature. Now, Koda often spends time talking to various bugs and animals thanks to his quirk Ani-Voice that helps them understand him. This quirk doesn't give him outright control over the creatures though, so he still has to ask for their cooperation, and thankfully they're usually willing to help. This quirk obviously has various uses, and it's easy to see how something like being able to talk to birds could be useful for getting information on an area, or maybe people who are far away or in hard to find places. In this episode though, we saw a different use of the quirk, which allowed Koda to summon a bug swarm to his aid, which if not downright creepy, tends to be pretty dangerous in anime. Koda's stats are a B in power, D in speed, C in intelligence, C in technique, and a B in not talking, which is funny since of course his quirk requires him to talk, and it's made even funnier by the fact that Koda is actually quite popular in the dorms because everyone, especially the girls, loves his pet rabbit UI-chan. A fun fact about Koda from the Ultra Analysis databook is that the horn on his head is still only partially grown, and it's something that's been passed down through his family's genes, meaning Koda's final design might feature a sharper, more rhino-like horn if we ever get to see our students grow up. And speaking of students that need to talk to use their quirk, we come to the final member of Team 1A for this first week, and that of course is Shinso Hitoshi, who doesn't yet have a hero name because this arc is serving as a test to see if he can even make it into the hero course. As part of that test, we see him team up with the Class 1A students this week, showing exactly how far he's come since the sports festival, where all he could do was try and surprise someone with his quirk and get them to walk outside of the ring. Shinso's quirk lets him brainwash someone under really strict conditions. However, with the use of his new Persona Cord mask, he's able to truly shift around and change his voice in a way that can fool others into replying to him far more often. After training with Aizawa over time with a lot of hard work, he learned Aizawa's binding cloth technique, which gives him another way of defending himself since the technique was originally designed by Aizawa, who normally has to depend on it for taking on any number of enemies, despite him not technically having a quirk suited for close combat or fighting mutant types. Shinso's stats are D in power, D in speed, B in intelligence, A- in technique, and an A in passion. Like I said, he's been training with Aizawa in the background ever since becoming a rising star at the sports festival, who really drew a lot of attention towards the general course students at UA, and we find out from the databook that his friends are planning a surprise party for him as a farewell if he does make it into the hero course, which I find really sweet. And with that, folks, we have all of the stats for the various characters involved in today's matches. So with this, I want to ask you a question that hopefully we can continue to ask and answer week to week in these guide videos. Do you feel like the stats line up with who ultimately won the match? If so, or especially if not, why do you think that is? And how did the students and quirks within each team pair up within the teams to counteract the other team in a way that reinforced or completely ignored the stats? Let me know in the comment section below, because I really think some interesting conversations can come of this, and I hope this video was really informative for anime onlys, just to give you a deeper look at what the official power rankings and stats were for these first teams. Again, if you want me to come back next week and break down the next teams, let me know by getting this video to 1,000 likes, and tell me if there's anything that you think I should include if I do. I really thought this episode was incredible with how it adapted chapters 196 and 197 into the anime, and I hope this energy and pace continues further into the season as we tread on. The character acting in this episode, in the way that I feel like everyone got a really hype and well storyboarded and animated moment to shine, is exactly what I was hoping for out of this arc, featuring so many characters that we haven't seen in quite some time. So while I am excited for next week, that's all I have to say now. This is Pineapple. I'll see you guys later. Peace.